Graham, welcome again. We would love to hear a little bit more about your journey as an author. You've written many books, and we just want to pick your brain and hear a little bit about your journey. So, my first question is, what was an early experience where you learned that language had power?
Well, I've always loved language and I've always loved reading. And as a child, I would lock myself away for days on end reading books. And what began as a kind of a quirk of an introverted child who loved language and loved reading quickly became something which began to define my life and my sense of who I was in the world. And I realized early on that I could use language in a way that would achieve certain outcomes. So kids often do this. I discovered that I could use language to get my parents to do certain things that they may not initially have wanted to do. So I discovered, you know what, language actually can be a powerful thing. And I remember when I was about 15 and I sat an English language test and came second out of about 150 boys in my year group. And all of the opportunities that began to open up for me as a consequence of that. And I realized that actually this private, personal love of language and literature and books
Mm, mm,
could be something that could be defining for my life,
yeah,
that would open doors and actually would influence people for good
yeah.
or not for good, depending on how I wanted to use this particular gift. So I've always loved language and always, and begun to believe more and more over the years that it can be used in all kinds of ways and be quite powerful.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. Now, what literary pilgrimages have you gone on?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's interesting thinking back over 50 years, what have been the defining moments. And
Yeah,
sometimes I look at my library and if I look through my library and I look at a book that I bought 30 years ago, and you can follow, sometimes your personal library is an opportunity to follow your own literary pilgrimage. One of the books that made a really big impact on me was this particular book by Eugene Peterson called Take and Read.
yeah,
And Eugene Peterson in this book looks at about 20 categories of books that Christians should read and reflect on and soak up in order to be formed for a rich spiritual life.
yeah,
So there's about 20 categories and about 15 or 20 books per category. So that's 200 and something books. And I picked up this book probably 30 years ago and have slowly been reading my way through those books a couple of times. And that's been a pilgrimage for me. Listening to voices of ancient authors,
yeah,
of voices from people from the majority world, all kinds of authors on theology, poetry,
mm,
literature, classics, and so on. And that's really shaped my love of literature and my concern that we as Christians listen deeply to what God is saying to us, not only in
mm,
Christian theology, but also in the voices of literature as well.
yeah. That's brilliant. And you've taken journeys. You've actually gone overseas. You spent 12 months overseas writing some of your books.
Yeah, that's true. I was very concerned to be doing research as much as possible in the context in which that I was writing about. So, for instance, just last year, I was writing on what can we learn from uh, theology that is emerging in Asia. So, I spent 3 months in Korea
Yeah.
and traveling around China and parts of Southeast Asia and reading Asian writers as I was doing my own writing as well.
Mm,
And for this particular book, Global Church, for instance,
yeah.
I traveled, for a year. Almost every day I was on a plane through Asia, Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, First Nation communities, right across Oceania, listening to voices as I was doing the researching and writing. Because my feeling is that if I lock myself away in a room, I can try to summarize what I'm hearing from the writing of others. But if I'm actually listening to the voices on the ground, it enriches my writing as
Certainly.
well.
Yeah, absolutely. And what an enriching uh, opportunity for those that actually were able to share with you as well. That's fantastic. Now, how many books have you written, and which is your favorite?
Yeah, so I've published 6 books and I've got 4 books coming out this year. Now, that's not a normal year. So it was because I was on study leave last year, so I had lots of time to do research and writing.
Yeah.
And I think the book that's actually been my favourite is the one that I wrote with Grace Ji-Sung Kim,
Yeah.
called Healing Our Broken Humanity.
Yeah.
And I think what I love most about that book is that it was an opportunity for a white, middle-aged Australian man to write with a Korean American female writer, theologian,
Yeah.
and for us to bring our gifts and our perspectives together, to listen deeply to each other,
Yeah.
to write about discipleship and church life and
Yeah.
mission and justice together, bringing our perspectives together. I think that's what I enjoyed most about that.
Yeah.
You know, writing with someone can be a really frustrating thing. You know, I've talked to a lot of writers who say, I was a friend with someone until I tried to write a book with them. And then I discovered it's just too difficult. But
Yeah.
actually, Grace and I found the opposite for us. We're best of friends. And the more we researched, the more we wrote together, the
Yeah.
more we listened deeply to each other,
Yeah.
the more we deferred to each other's perspectives, the deeper our relationship and friendship became. And I think it is my favourite book, Healing Our Broken Humanity.
Brilliant. I'm looking forward to getting my teeth into that one. Lots of interesting stories, especially I like that dance illustration that came through Grace's experience with her daughter and dance.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, her daughter is a professional dancer. An interesting story, they came to Sydney last year, and I took them to Bondi Beach. And we were walking along by the beach, and Grace had her daughter with her. And Grace's daughter said, "Can I get a photo up near the Lifesavers booth?" And I said, "Sure." So we went up to the Lifesavers booth, and she began to tell me, they're from Philadelphia. She
Yeah.
began to tell me about Bondi Rescue and how much she loves it. And I said, "Why don't I get a photo with one of the Lifesavers?"
Yeah.
So I walked up the steps, I knocked on the door, and the door opened. And I don't watch Bondi Rescue, so I didn't know anything about this. But apparently, Elizabeth's jaw fell open because the person at the door was one of the famous characters on Bondi Rescue. I didn't know that, and I said to him, "Look, do you mind coming out and getting a photo with us?" So we got all sorts of photos with him. And as we were walking down the beach, she was texting all her friends in Philadelphia saying, "I've just got a photo with this famous star from Bondi Rescue." It was a great moment, and wonderful to have them with us here in Sydney.
Yeah, what a great opportunity to co-author that book and also build relationship as well as you do that.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Now, what would you say is your interesting writing quirk?
Oh, my writing quirk. That's a good question. There's probably two things that I always do when I'm writing. I mean, the first thing is I can think of three things now. I always light a candle.
Yeah.
So when I'm writing, if you look next to my computer and the books, there's always a candle. And there's something about having a candle burning. I'm not even sure what it is. Sometimes when I look at the flame, it draws my attention to Christ.
Yeah.
I remember that I'm writing in His presence. So there's something spiritual about having a candle there.
Yeah.
The second thing I always do is I always have the blinds open, and I usually look out over a garden or a forest. Where we live, we look over Lane Cove National Park.
Yeah.
So I look out over the forest. There's something about that sort of expansive space that is good for my soul as I'm doing writing.
Yeah.
And the third thing that I do is I usually spend about 10 to 15 minutes reading parts of C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity before I begin writing.
Yeah.
That's a book that's been really powerful for me. And as I read that book for 10 or 15 minutes before I begin writing, I just listen to C.S. Lewis's voice. And I imagine myself adopting or absorbing that voice. And after I've done that, then I begin writing. I don't know why. It's a quirk, it's a habit, and it seems to enhance my writing.
Brilliant. What an amazing practice. Wow. I love it. The creation, checking out over the views, the candle, which is bringing you back into the presence of God and soaking in some words of an incredible author. Oh, that's brilliant. So tell us a little bit more about what you like to do when you're not writing.
Yeah, probably my two favorite things is every day I walk my dogs. So I've got two dogs. I've got a little um, Shih Tzu cross toy poodle, and I've got a Groodle. So we walk for an hour every day to around the neighbourhood and to the dog park. It's one of
Yeah.
my favourite things to do every day, and it's very life giving for me. And then the second thing is spending the day at the beach with the family or body surfing by myself. Being out in the ocean is a very sort of spiritual experience for me,
Yeah.
very cleansing.
Yeah.
I like the mountains, but I love the ocean. I
Yeah.
want to be as close to the water as I can be. And so anytime I get some time off, either walking the dogs or down swimming, walking on the beach and swimming.
Oh, beautiful. I do love the water too. I agree. Definitely, there's something therapeutic about it. So, oh, that's wonderful. Now, what was one of the most surprising things you learned in creating your book?
I think as an author, the thing that strikes you all the time is that you begin to see what you really believe. The thing about writing is that often I'll begin writing on something like discipleship, and when I begin, I really don't know what I believe on the topic.
Yeah.
And as I pray, as I write, as I reflect, something begins to emerge, and then by the time it finishes, I think, yeah, this is what I believe, and I didn't know that before I started writing.
Yeah.
So writing can be a process of self-discovery for a writer
Yeah.
and a very spiritual experience.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing I notice. The second thing that surprises me is not only what I discover that I really believe, but the second thing that surprises me is how often the Spirit sort of reshapes my belief. So I'll be listening to the voice of another author, so I'm reflecting on an area,
Yeah.
and the Holy Spirit will be prompting me, challenging me. How am I going to change?
Yeah.
What am I going to repent of? How can I be renewed?
Mm.
So I think writing, the thing that surprises me about writing is what I believe
Yeah.
and how I need to change.
Powerful. So good. Good things for all of us to think about and chew over. Love it. Now, do you want each book that you have written to stand on its own? Or are you trying to build a body of work with connections between each book?
Yeah, so I'm developing a theme which I think of as something like theology for the global missional community.
Mm,
So I'm trying to draw all the books together in
yeah.
some way
Yeah.
as an effort to listen to diverse voices from all over the world
Yeah.
about what they have to say about what it means to be God's missionary people.
Yeah.
Um, and so they are all drawn together with probably two common themes. The first theme is listening closely to diverse voices from all over the world.
Yeah.
And the second theme is discovering by listening to those voices what it means to be disciples of Jesus Christ and a missionary church.
Yeah. Brilliant. Excellent. Love it. Wow. And my last and final question for you, what is your favorite childhood book?
Uh, I think it would be the Chronicles of Narnia, and a
Ah,
lot of people would say that,
yeah.
of course. But my mother used to read it to me as a boy, so there's something sentimental about that.
Yeah.
It's still one of my favorite narratives, and it remains a book that impacts me deeply, and also the way I think about language and literature and what it means to write well. So that would be it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you again for your time, for sharing your journey as an author. We have loved hearing what you've had to say. Thanks, Graham.
Thanks.